Good.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Collective. We are live once again. We have another couple awesome guests. Obviously, guest number one, Shaun Taylors. He's always
Guest
happy
number
to be here.
two.
Guest number two, and we have our second overall guest.
Guest number one.
First in our hearts for sure.
For sure.
Kate Stewart.
First runner-up.
First runner.
You're out of there.
Yeah, we're done. Just like exit right now, off to the side. No, we're good. We got some really interesting stuff right off the hop. But first off, Kate, before we go anywhere, we want you to talk about Shoot Like a Girl podcast. So
yes,
tell us a little bit about that, who you're looking forward to talking to this year, and then we'll get into the rest of it. So you go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so my podcast is called Shoot Like a Girl podcast. I originally started it just because I was sort of finding myself listening to podcasts that were all hosted by men and predominantly had male guests on. And every now and then they would have a wicked female guest on. And I was kind of thinking like most women probably don't listen to these podcasts, so they would never hear this guest. So I kind of thought that I would start my own podcast just with sort of badass military women. And I wasn't doing really regular episodes. It was sort of whenever I could get a chance between work and the university courses that I was working on. But this semester, I'm not doing any courses. And my big goal is really just to focus on the podcast a lot more. A couple of weeks ago, actually on New Year's, I put out a list on my Instagram of who I wanted to have on this year. And so tomorrow I'm having Monday, I am having Mandy. She's on Instagram at Mother of Dragons. And she's an Army veteran and a firefighter, like super
She looks
wicked.
Hardcore.
She is, yeah, she's super hardcore. So I was really excited to get her on. And then hopefully I'll start picking away at the rest of that list and just, have more guests, more reach, and bigger audience.
There we go. I had to unmute myself. That's awesome. I'm really looking forward to hearing that one. And you had I can't remember her name, the first female ranger, right?
She wasn't the first. She was one of the first.
One of the first. Right.
Lisa Jaster. Yeah, she's also super hardcore. She actually just got her brown belt, I believe, which was on one of her goals for this year, but she got it just at the end of 2022. And she went through ranger school at 37, which is pretty hardcore because I'm 37 right now. And some days I get up and I feel like I can barely move. And then I think to myself, like, okay, Lisa Jaster did ranger school at this age. So
yeah, nothing like no sleep for 3 days and being in the bush and being destroyed. And then going, oh man, and I'm almost 40.
Yeah.
Oh, that's rough. Well, that's awesome. We're really looking forward to what you got coming up, and we're looking forward to having you on the Collective much more often because, well, for anybody that wouldn't know, who actually are you and what do you do? Because you're a badass, first off.
Who's the real person?
Who is the real person behind Shoots Like a Girl podcast? Let's hear about that.
I'm Kate.
To the extent that you can.
Oh yeah. Well, I'd tell you, but no, I'm just joking. I'm in the Navy Reserves. I've been in for about 15 years now, but most of my time in the reserves has been on what's called Class B or C contracts. So I'm kind of a permanent reservist working on full-time contracts. My trade is a port inspection diver. So I spent some time working at the dive unit on the East Coast and a couple of different reserve units throughout the country. And then most recently, the past couple of years, just been working with a tactical unit in the Navy. And that's pretty much it. I just want to do sort of fun stuff with my career and push myself and challenge myself.
That's the way to do it.
Sounds like you are. Hey, listen, Shaun, I do have a question for you, which is unrelated to anything that you've just said. But I'm looking at I assume it's a decal or some sort of stick-on or something behind your head. What's that about?
Okay, so I've got to get a good frame for this. I'm going to see if I can move this. This is Operator Lizzie. I'll put a picture of it on my Instagram. So there's a guy in the UK and he does digital art and his username is Forces Art. And so he's got this Operator Lizzie where she's all tacked up and you could customize the flag. So of course I saw his with the British flag and I thought I'm going to order one of those with a Canadian flag and sort of have that be in my little podcast background. So I was just telling Chance before you logged in that one of my goals for the next little while is to do this wall in my little podcast room to make it a nice sort of podcast background for videos.
Well, you're off to an awesome start. I don't know how long you've had that. I've seen it. Mm-hmm. I've seen it a few times on your site, etc. But how long have you had it?
I've had it quite a while. Yeah, I just normally, I guess, don't have video or pictures of my face. So,
what was his name again?
Forces Art.
Forces Art.
Yeah. Let me see here.
Give me 2 seconds and I'll put it up on screen and we can actually.
Oh, sure.
So you guys chat for a second.
And that is next level. Chance.
Yeah. Forces _art_. And he's got a lot of really cool ones, like Winston Churchill with mortars and a bunch of other stuff. So it's pretty
now neat. Did he serve in the UK military?
I think so. Yeah, I think that he's a veteran.
I don't want to put you on the spot. I was just curious a little bit.
No worries.
So you and I talked not too long ago, of course, and we were talking about resilience and on my IG live chat. Thank you for joining me. But post coming out of that, did anyone like poke you in the chest and say that guy sucks, or poke you in the chest and say you suck, or you both suck, or you were both awesome? Did you get any feedback?
Well, I always get a lot of, the Shaun Taylor is awesome feedback. So like a celebrity.
No, not at all. If you only knew. So how was it? So you got positive feedback?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't get like too much feedback from it at all. But yeah, like some people will just say, "Oh, I saw you on Shaun Taylor's live."
I suppose that's enough for me.
Yeah.
What you got, Chance? Did you find it?
Oh, there we go. Yes.
Oh, Coldstream Guards. Oh, right. So I guess you could go unit and subunit, right?
Yeah. So you can customize whatever flag, and I think there's some more little customizations on our gear that you can do. But yeah, he's got some pretty neat stuff.
Yeah, I dig that. Oh, shout out to that dude.
Yeah, it's an obscure paper size, so I think I might have trouble finding a frame, but she deserves a good frame, so I gotta make something nice there.
Indeed. For now, it's still legit. So, what's going on? Has anything changed since you and I talked last, or?
Not a whole ton. Speaking of resilience, finished this English course that I was working on.
What's the word?
Kind of. Yeah, it was driving me nuts. I got it done because I had failed it last year when I overcommitted myself. Redid it, passed it this year, and then just sort of making some goals for myself for this upcoming spring season, which involve more time on the podcast and more of the jiu-jitsu.
Nice. Saw a photo of you there on the Instagram stories just the other night, a couple nights ago, whatever. Looked like you're about to get Radmaster 9000 on that. How'd it go?
Yeah, so I was back in Halifax because that's where I'm from, and so that's where my family is. So I went back there for the Christmas break, and I checked out 2 gyms there. So Halifax BJJ Society, awesome gym, super good instructors. And then I wanted to check out a gym called Titans MMA as well. It's very close to where my mom lives, and they have there are 2 guys that started that place, got their black belts, I think, directly from Henzo Gracie like years ago, back in the day. So it's pretty legit. So I checked out
old school legit.
Yeah. So I checked out one of their beginner classes, which was interesting because at my gym there's no beginner everything's just everyone together. But they had beginner class, which was white belt, like 3 stripe and under. So that was really that was good too. And yeah, definitely.
Which one did you prefer? I don't want to say which club did you prefer. And I don't want to say which style did you prefer, but which one did you kind of today feel that you
Yeah.
gained the most? Not how you felt a year ago or a year from now, but what do you think?
Well, so it was interesting because I find I don't have a lot to, like, reference myself to.
Mhm.
So at my gym, everyone is I mean, there's some beginners, but I find, like, a lot of people are quite high level, so I always feel like I'm just surviving and I'm just playing a defensive game. And sometimes, like, I don't realize, I'm like, "Okay, am I getting any better?" Like, I have no idea. Um,
It's
so
hard to
it's
tell.
it
I
it
mean, it
is, it
is.
really is, especially when you roll with the same people, and so
That's
they're
right.
also getting better, so
The
it's
fir
kind
the
of
first time you know is when that
Mhm.
next first person comes in,
Yes.
their first night.
Yes. So when I did go to, Titans, there were a couple of women there that were like, "Oh, I've only, been at it for a few months." And then I kind of noticed, I was like, "Oh, okay, I am." I was able to notice, like, improvements within myself. So that was they were both awesome, but that one I particularly kinda noticed, like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I am slowly,
Oh, I
very
do
slowly
learn.
making improvements at this sport that is just, there's so much to learn." So
It's important. It's important to be able to reference a yardstick, or it's
Mhm.
important to be able to get fresh blood into the gym or go to a gym where there's fresh blood so you can contextualize yourself against someone who doesn't have as much time on the mats as you do. So you can feel that positive feedback of, okay, I am learning. This does work. This is good. Just put in the time.
Yeah, and even rolling with people that you don't know, because if you always go to the same gym, it's always the same people you're rolling with. You kind of learn to, like, recognize their styles or, their game, and then you just go somewhere new where you don't know anyone, and it's completely different. So I think that should definitely, be encouraged as well whenever people get the chance.
It goes the other way too. Like you get used to everybody else's game too, and they get
Mhm.
used to yours. So there's this
Mhm.
back and forth, right? And I couldn't agree more. In Edmonton we have the Arashido um, team. I guess there's I think 6 of them in the Edmonton area, and we work against each other, but not very regularly. So like we'll open mat over there, or they'll open mat in our like the east side will come up to us, or that we'll go up to the north side, or whatever. But every time we do, it's that little exposure to a
Mhm.
whole new group of people, whole different style. The black belts teach to a very high level, but they all have their own games that they teach to their students. So their students play a different game than we do, and it's lots of fun. But and it actually brings up what we were going to talk about today as a whole, which is establishing a baseline.
Outstanding.
How's that for a segue? The reason I was thinking of that as you guys were talking about it is that if you only ever train with the same people constantly over and over and over again, like you said, there's a point where you start to uh, you're everyone's improving, but that just becomes the baseline of improvement. So
Mhm.
you don't really see any outliers to see whether or not you're getting better or worse, because you're still getting smoked by the same people. You're still getting the games become stagnant and so on and so forth. But let's hear you guys' thoughts on establishing a baseline, even within that situation. Who wants to go first?
I can go
Sean Taylor
first.
can go
Sure,
first.
why not? I'll have a guess. I think that let's use BJJ as the example to establish what a baseline should be or can be. And let's build off of the conversation that we were just having in respect to how, if you're on the same mats for so long, rolling with the same partners, everyone's used to everyone's game, and there becomes a neutralizing effect. And so you can pre-predict what someone is going to be doing 3 or 4 seconds in the future, and you can get on with neutralizing that game because you've seen it 1,000 times from that same person. You know how it's all going to play out. They also know that you're going to try to neutralize their move, so they're running their counter neutralization processes. And so through many repetitions with the same people, your baseline becomes skewed because you're not truly or purely establishing your level of BJJ. What you're doing is you're having there's an artificial influence of a familiarity of knowing a game so well that there's a neutralizing game rather than a BJJ game. And so the best way to baseline yourself is two ways. One is internally. And if we're just speaking about BJJ, then you need to be able to understand what you've gone through in the past and what you're capable of now. That's your baseline internally. And the problem with internal baselines is, or the potential of internal baselines being a problem is if you have a false sense of who you are internally, if you believe something that isn't real. So you can do your internal baseline and establish who you think you are, but then you've got to reflect upon it through the external baseline of all the people around you. And so on BJJ, that means I believe what I am, but now I've got to test it against what's in front of me in the external world. And so, like any beginner, day one, you can believe whatever you want to believe when you grab that doorknob to the BJJ gym, open it up and think, oh, I'm going to sort this crew out, or whatever someone thinks on their first night. Maybe they think this is going to be super scary and I'm super scared and et cetera, et cetera. That's another baseline, an internal baseline. But those are beliefs, baseline beliefs that then have to be pressure tested by the external world. And as a first night person, whether you come in super confident or super scared is immaterial. Those are just internal thoughts that you've established as your own internal reality. Pressure testing them through the external world on the mats, that first roll, well, now you're going to understand how clear or how correct your internal baseline is. And so I believe that establishing a baseline requires two elements: your internal work, not just a single sentence within your head of, I rock. I mean, you got to spend time thinking about who you are deeply through the past and who you are in the present. Once you've established what you believe your internal world is, go pressure test it in the external world.
Dang. Got anything to add on that?
No, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that, like, what people's thoughts are before they walk through the doors for the first time, because I think it can go either way. There are people who are just like, I'm going to get destroyed. I'm so nervous. And then, the other, like the tough guys who think, well, I've been watching UFC for 10 years. I'm going to walk in there and destroy everyone. And then they get, tapped out by a 14-year-old girl. So,
sure.
And even, and I noticed that with myself going to new gyms, I'm like, oh man, like kind of nervous or intimidated, right? I've built that comfort zone in my own gym, but then going to a new place, it's like, oh, is it all just going to be like big dudes? And, is there any, like, how are they going to treat me when I walk in? And it's just, and I build that up in my head, but then I go there and everyone's, super nice and friendly. So it's that kind of defeats that. But it is something, that a lot of people feel, especially if someone has never been to, an MMA gym or a jiu-jitsu gym before. Like, it's intimidating to go and start, but generally, like, everyone was there once. Everyone was a beginner. So people are generally a bit more friendly than what you might make up in your head, that whatever scenarios might potentially happen.
That's actually a really important point that, as you said, you can go to a gym on that new gym, wherever, the first night at that new gym, even if you're experienced, and there should be a little bit of nerves.
Mm-hmm.
The only time there won't be nerves is if you're precisely synchronized internally and externally.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me throw this at you as the example of what I'm talking about. If you're really confident inside and really skilled, really experienced, let's pretend you're a black belt,
Mm-hmm.
and you are confident in who you are, you can still step onto that mat fearful if your internal baseline is, I'm going to get my ass kicked. I'm an imposter. I don't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be ... And so that internal dialogue, or that new internal baseline, because it's a new club, that people that you don't know,
Mm-hmm.
that new baseline can only be pressure tested again externally. But what I'm suggesting is this: you don't have to let the external world tell you who you are. You can be cooperative in that process. And let me give the example. Black belt, confident, going to a new gym, has some concern. Maybe I'm an imposter. They step on the mat, and now they get to decide how the external world views them. They can either come across cocky and ignorant, or they can come across as humble and nice to be around. So that black belt can step on and sneer at everyone and growl at everyone and be a hard man. Or that black belt can step onto the mat and nod and smile at everyone and say, hey, it's great to be here. Really looking forward to spending the hour with everyone. And anyone want to roll?
Mm-hmm.
And so those are two different types of approaches. So we can set our own baselines, but we're not unwilling victims to the external world. We still get to shape the external world's opinion of who we are, which then helps shape who we are in that real-time moment. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I guess I'm just a brand new white belt, so I don't have any delusions of my abilities.
But it still applies. Whether it's BJJ or whether it's shooting or whether it's pole jumping or javelin throwing, doesn't matter what it is. Washing the dishes. If you feel whatever you feel internally as your baseline, you still got to pressure test it against the external world, and you have to let the external world give you feedback. And that feedback is also being shaped by your attitude, whether you're washing the dishes or throwing a javelin.
I got let's see if I can do this here. I'm trying to I just screwed it up.
You're fired. We're gonna hire Jamie now.
Burls. I don't know if I've ever really I haven't gone seeking too much on Jamie. Have you ever seen photos of him? Do you know much about him? Or
I have. I did. There
I know a
are
little
pictures
bit.
of him out there. Yeah, I think it was just from the very early days that
Right, I would say.
stuck
Now it's
with
become
him.
a bit of a mystique.
Yeah. Okay, what do we have here?
What you got going there, pal? Oh, I see. We're supposed to read his mind as we look at the image. Okay, I'm trying to read your mind, Chance. Let me read your mind.
This is what I tell people when they first start BJJ, and I'm going to go over it real quickly. Is that there's always 4 steps, right? There's always, and this is how I basically work my baseline, I guess, is that anytime you're going to try anything new, you're gonna suck at it, right? If you're doing BJJ, you're gonna lose all the time, and you gotta get right with that. And that's your where it says here your curve forecast without action. I guess you guys can't see my mouse, can you? I have to switch over.
No,
but we don't need to see it.
Oh, I can see it.
There we go. I just have to switch the window. Boom. I'm learning. So you're gonna this is you. This is your average. You're working. You're every day. You're going there. Blah 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 blah. And all of a sudden, you're gonna see an armbar. You're gonna see an opportunity for an armbar, and you're gonna be like, "Ooh, I saw it," but you're not gonna be able to get it because you're gonna be well behind. You'll just have seen it in a moment, and it'll be like, "Oh, there it went." And then you target that armbar. So now you're looking up here, and you have to be able to continually see it, and then you're going to see it early enough that you're going to be able to try for it, and then you're going to continue to try for it, not get it, try for it, not get it, and then eventually you're going to try for it, you're going to catch it, but it's not going to be great, and eventually you get to a point where you actually can hit that arm bar over and over and over and over again. But that's because you have to take action. right? Deeds, not words, right? If you just say, oh, I'm going to get that armbar one day, but never actually work for it, then you'll just hang out down here and you just carry on. But if you actually start looking for it, not just when you see it, or sorry, correction, you're going to see it and start working for it, then you're going to get up here, but you won't actually see the movement unless you have something to compare against. Does that make sense?
It does. I think what you're describing, at least as I see it, is two terminologies.
Oh, okay.
One is a baseline. The other one is targets. And so your baseline is established as frequently as you want. So using this diagram as an example, you could set a baseline on yourself every day, or you could set a baseline on yourself every year. And so this is goals or milestones or targets or actionable items within a trajectory curve, and that's good. Those are the things that move baselines. But in order to understand where you've moved from, which is called a baseline, you have to understand your baseline. And then once you've established your baseline, now you're executing against targets, which I think is what we're talking about now, right?
You're muted.
Good job on the mute, pal.
I said thank you for the clarification. You're absolutely right. That's exactly.
But it's not a. I'm not counterpointing you. I'm not pushing back or anything. I'm just suggesting that there are targets once you've established baselines, but they cooperate together. And here's my point: they cooperate either tightly or loosely, depending on how long of a timeline you're viewing your baseline over. So if you re-baseline every day, which you can, or you re-baseline every half a year, which you can, it really depends on how frequently you're baselining.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I would think, with Shaun coaching high performance athletes, before they would start training with you, you would probably try and establish a baseline on their fitness level for cardio and their nutrition, right? And then reevaluate that every so often to develop a new baseline.
Actually, if you don't mind, I'll use that as an example to kind of describe the process of what I would do with every incoming athlete that I would accept. And so within the preferably first handful of days, definitely within the first week of me accepting an athlete, I would establish a baseline on them. And that baseline would be their ability to hold a certain amount of workload over a certain amount of time. And it's called an FTP test, functional threshold power test. And how I would test that is the athlete would be on a wattage device mounted on their bike, and depending on where they lived in the world, it didn't matter to me. I would ask them to try to simulate something similar to a triathlon effort, or like a long, hard, steady state effort, not a spiky effort, not a mountain biking climbing effort, but a long, steady effort, preferably on a grade of about 2 to 3%, so that they weren't dealing with, going down a hill. Now they're trying to develop powers. They're going down a hill, but they're riding too fast to be able to put out steady power. So get on a steady climb for 20 minutes and put out, like your life depends on it, for 20 minutes. And so, of course, there's a phase before that where you work a person through the warm-ups before they hit that hard 20 minutes. And then there's a cool down after the fact, and so on and so forth. But I would be looking within that first week for them to establish their FTP, or functional threshold power. And that's a bunch of math, no big deal. But I would establish a baseline on them of X based on that math. And now that's their baseline. While simultaneously on that wattage baseline, I'd be looking at their HR, or heart rate, and I would be looking at their rate of pedaling, how many, what their RPM is. I'd be looking at speeds. I'd be looking at all kinds of things, which are unimportant, other than to state within the first week, I'm looking for a baseline on them, which is almost immaterial. And that's going to make sense in a sec. Because when someone comes to me, they typically are not even close to seeing what they're capable of. And so, in short order, within a couple of weeks, guaranteed that baseline is changing, because I'm gonna teach them how to train properly, or I'm gonna draw more out of them. And typically, there's at least within a couple of weeks a 5% increase in their baseline on their FTP, functional threshold power. And so, over the course of a year, depending on how young they are in their career, and by I don't mean calendar age, I mean in their racing career, if they're fairly new, that baseline is going to get reestablished a number of times throughout the year, because they're going to, like, in some cases, double their abilities with me, or working together with me. And so, but if they've been in the racing game a long time, or if I've coached them for a handful of years, I don't need to reestablish baselines much more than once or twice a year, because I know them so well. I know what their baseline is all the time. And so, establishing baselines, using that as the example, and man, I could talk about it for days, but the baseline is important within the first week. Let's call it day one. But that first baseline, in my opinion, is a cursory or a very preliminary example of what they're going to look like a month from now. So reestablishing baselines on a reasonably regular basis, based on who the person is in front of me, how experienced they are, how much potential I think they've untapped yet. Those are the things that you've got to think of as a coach. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And sorry, if I could just add one thing. I mean, coming from the point of view of someone who, it's a good way too to track progress, because like I said with the jiu-jitsu thing, like sometimes I might not, you might not feel like you're making progress at something, because if you just look at yourself every day, you do the same thing every day or some variation of it. But then to go back and look, like, for example, I'm not a very good runner, but I was running quite a bit last year, and I would think like,
yeah, up mountains, by the way.
I'm not really getting any faster. But then when I look at the data from my Garmin, I'm like, oh, well, but my heart rate used to be, an average, whatever it was, but now the average heart rate for the same run at the same speed is a lot lower. So, okay, so I am actually getting better. So it is very valuable to look at that stuff, the baselines, because it just sort of reassures yourself, or it lets you know where you need to work on in that regard.
Hey, can I throw something in about HR? Just I don't want to let it slide and someone think, but Shaun, you always used to tell me. So with HR, when I was coaching racers, wattage was the only gold standard. Wattage never lies, ever. And so you get on your bike and you start hammering up a hill, and in your head you're thinking, I'm freaking hammering. But you're off. You're off 15%. You're down 15%, and here's why: because you're poorly hydrated, you didn't recalorie the night before, you didn't sleep well, you're super stressed, but in your head you're like, I'm hammering. But that's only in your head. And it feels that way, but your body isn't putting out because you're down 15%. Now, to throw a monkey wrench into that, but you're looking at your heart rate and you're thinking, but I am freaking hammering. Look at my heart rate. Here's the thing about heart rate. I always used to call it a fickle mistress. It lies constantly. If your hydration level is off, your HR is off. If you had poor sleep, your HR is off. If you're stressed, it's off. If you're ... I could continue. Elevation, the humidity, the this, the that. I could list off a dozen things, but it would bore everyone. The point being that HR is something that can be valuable, and you can use it as a baseline. But like all baselines, you've got a trend. It can't be isolated blips of, oh, look at that. I just cherry picked a moment, and I'm not saying that's what you are doing. I am saying it because there'll be athletes who may listen to this and they'll say, but Shaun, we all know that HR lies. And so HR lies, but over a long trend where you understand how it lies and why it lies and what impacted it to lie, you then can begin to more clearly strip out some of the white noise of HR impactors and get a better sense of how it can be valuable as a baseline, because it's still a good tool. It's just not as clean a signal as pure wattage. I hope that makes sense.
Here's a question then. Can anything be a baseline? Can you cherry pick basically anything depending on what you're doing, obviously, that has to be affected by it? But
in my opinion, no. And nothing, no single metric can be used as the only baseline, the only factor that I need to create a baseline. I think it's okay, I'll take it back to square one and say, yeah, sure you can, if you don't care. I mean, if you don't really believe in baselines, sure, you can pick the phase of the moon as your baseline. I mean, if you don't care, there's your baseline. What's the moon tell you? But if you want to know about yourself and form a baseline on you, not the phase of the moon, well, now you've got to look at yourself internally, and then you've got to view that through the external world, just as we were talking about. And so how deeply do you want to know yourself? How much do you want to know about yourself? Do you just want to know your HR? Or do you want to understand how it's impacted by sleep and hydration and calories, and what kind of calories? And was the big butter sandwich that I had before my ride, the fat load that I took on, is that impacting my HR and blah, blah, blah. And so how granular do you want to look at the problem? Well, for me, it's freaking electron microscope granular. But I've been doing it a long time.
I would never have thought that.
But I was trying to do that when I didn't know how to do it. And I wasn't doing it because I didn't know how to do it. But over many, many years, I just learned to do it better because I tried to do it better, because I tried to pay more attention, because I tried to be more granular. So when you're a day one noob, how can you be granular? You can't even spell it. But years and years into the game of not just a single game, not just of riding or BJJ or whatever. I mean, the game of life. You could be a runner, you could be a javelin thrower. Man, you could be a competitive world champion macrame knitter. It doesn't matter to me. If you're in the game of being the best that you can be, being super freaking legit as a world champion macrame person, start paying attention to your trends, your baselines at a granular level. I mean, you just have to. Otherwise, and I'm not going to say you're dabbling, but otherwise, you're not deeply considering your potential.
So let's give a rundown real quick here on how would you set your baseline? What would be your priorities in metrics, I guess?
I would say, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. What do you got?
Well, I would say it depends on what activity you're doing, right? Because everything is going to be different, right? Like maybe if I'll just keep going back to jiu-jitsu because that seems to be our common example, right? So not that I would, but just say I was wearing a heart rate monitor during jiu-jitsu and I'm using that as my baseline, but I'm still getting tapped out every 30 seconds when I'm rolling with everyone at the gym. But my heart rate's improving and my cardio is improving, but I'm not making any improvements in actual jiu-jitsu, then that's not gonna. It doesn't matter if I'm tracking that, and that's not really an effective baseline for that purpose. Like for example, for me, since I'm a white belt, that started off, when I was first rolling with people, okay, I'll get tapped out every 10 or 15 seconds, and then now it's okay, maybe it's a bit longer. Maybe I go for a minute or two. Maybe I go a whole round with someone without letting them tap me out. So for me, generally, that's my baseline for this. So it has to be something that's very much related to the outcome of whatever activity it is that you're doing.
I agree with that, but let me throw this at you. So I was just grabbing my phone,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope you can see this. There we go. So that's my sleep from last night. That's my readiness, 95 out of 100.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can trend yourself externally through other people, but also through yourself. And so before you even pull your socks on in the morning to go do BJJ several hours in the future, you should understand where you sit on how you slept. These are trends that should be tracked. These are things that might not be important to you now because you haven't started forming a trend yet. But if you start tracking daily, that was from my
The
Oura
Oura.
ring, OURA ring. So if you're forming a trend on your sleep so that you can start connecting the dots on underperformance, overperformance, and neutral performance, so that you can start analyzing the delta that is created in your future BJJ role later that day, how you've performed then should be viewed backwards through the lens of the data that you're collecting on yourself throughout the day. And so, how do you learn data? Well, you track it. You can either write it down, you can electronically capture it, keep it in your head, whatever you want, but you've got a trend. And let's use something as simple as water, since I just saw someone take a drink of water, Chance. And that's awesome. I mean, that's what we should all be doing, is thinking about hydrating ourselves throughout the day, of course. But how do you know how hydrated you're supposed to be? Now, I'm not going to say everyone should do this, because it can be unsafe for some people. But I will say this: in order to understand how thirsty feels, stop drinking and wait a few hours.
Yeah.
Until you're thirsty. And now you've remembered what thirsty feels like. And then the following day, and again, safely, don't overhydrate, hyponatremia, let's not get all crazy. But the next day, drink a lot more than you normally do and see how you feel. And then think to yourself, which one did I feel better? Dehydrated or overhydrated? Now I know my left and right of arcs. Now I've just got to dial it down, not for my neighbor, not for my dog, but for me.
Yeah.
And not for me a year ago, but for me now. These are baselines that have to be understood through understanding your extremes, trending within those extremes over a timeline that you can reflect upon and say, I need to tweak that one.
So we have a question.
Ooh, how exciting.
I know, right? And let me just throw it up here. Here we go. And I will read it out as well. How do you know when to tap out, metaphorically or physically, actually, because it's a good one too, versus continuing to push through whatever it may be in life? Gut instinct is one way, but there has to be more, I believe. So
it's a great question.
Kate, you got first up. Hit it.
Yeah, this one's really interesting, right? Because there's that. I was listening to a podcast, I think it was like Andy Stumpf the other day, and he was saying, the SEAL mindset, like the never quit mindset, can some ways be like very obviously like detrimental.
It can be a problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of, when I read that and I'm thinking like, continue pushing through whatever it may be, like, I don't know how to word this. I'm just thinking, okay, I think of sort of a funny example that's not necessarily like anything physical or whatever, but just a way that your gut can play tricks on you. So I used to have a big phobia of flying, and not like flying. It's like, I guess, going on an airliner, because it's totally a control thing. I hate that closed cockpit door, and just not knowing what's going on back there. Right. So every time, like before I would fly, I would almost think like, I shouldn't get on this plane, like something bad's going to happen. But obviously
today's the day.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what my body would be like telling me. And I would have to override that and be like, okay, no, air travel's safe, blah, blah, blah. Maybe, a couple of drinks or something like that to help me get on the plane. Yeah. But in that sense, like if I were to just never get on an airplane, then I've, closed off most of the world to myself. So there is that, you know, and the same thing with injuries and working out as well, right? Like you could be like, oh, screw this, I'm not going to quit, like no rest days. But then if you work so hard that you blow your knee out and now you can't do anything for like a half a year, um, then that's a problem as well, right? So a lot of it, I think, comes from like really knowing yourself and knowing your body, and what's sort of good pain and what's like, oh, this is, you know, potentially like going to tear a ligament or break a limb or something like that. Um, I mean, Shaun could probably dive into this a lot more too. So I'm interested to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, it's coincidental that the question is asked because just I think it was about 3 days ago, a young fella out. He said he lives on Vancouver Island. His name is Joshua, if that's in fact his name. Put a question up on one of my YouTube videos that I put up just a little while ago. And they said, hi, Shaun, I want to be an operator, et cetera, et cetera. I'm 17 years old and I've picked up some injuries and et cetera. I'd like to be all that I can be. And what do you recommend in respect to, you know, he had a minor injury or he had an injury and whether he should train through that or not, or what do I recommend in these cases? And I gave him an answer and I broke it down as such. And whether I answered it a few days ago or if he would have asked me tomorrow, I would have still had the same answer. And I believe it's this. But my answer is not for everyone. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's for the typical person. But I'm going to give the answer as to what I believe, and then that the other person on the receiving end has to contextualize it within their life. So I break it down into this. How mission critical is it? So if I'm in the hurt locker, but it's important that I get that thing done, it's going to get done. If I gotta run on one leg, I'm going to learn how to hop. So if it's so important based on a prioritized target that's in the future that I know I have to execute against, I'm going to push through. But if I have the luxury of not having to be mission critical, charge hard through all of the injury, then I'm going to try to find a way to still keep improving, but at a pace that is reasonable to allow my injuries to heal. And so what I'd said to him is, hey, look, be smart. Because if you want to enter into the path that you're saying you want to enter into, if you want to do the kind of things that I had to do, it's a rough and tumble journey. You're gonna be in the hurt locker a number of times. And so you then get to decide if you just keep charging through it and eating that suffer, or you dial it back. If you've got the luxury, you dial it back and let yourself heal up. And I said, in my instance, I just kept pushing through. And now at 59, I've got chronic injuries that are my own doing, or, you know, the work or whatever. But there was things that I'm chronically injured with in my body that I don't let them hold me back. But if I didn't have them, I'd be able to perform better at 59. But I still do pretty well because I still push myself. I don't have anything mission critical in front of me right now. But if I had a world championship in front of me right now, I'd be freaking hammering and sucking it up and getting it done and pushing through the injury. But that's because I've prioritized. So I think for me, it comes down to, is it mission critical or not? And then branch off of that decision.
That's a great point. I was actually going to say something very similar, but priority is the key for sure. Because whether we say this in training all the time too, when we're running through like self-defense stuff, and you're like, okay, here's a simple trip, and you go to sweep somebody's leg while you're down and they're standing. In training, it's a very simple thing. You just catch the heel and you push the knee. But in real life, we say this all the time. If somebody's attacking you and you go to do this, smash his friggin' knee in, right? Or someone's got a...
Depending. I mean, you know.
Yeah, what I mean, like, again, it's a priority, right?
Contextualizing.
Absolutely. And there's but we did this in uniform too, is that when you're training in the back 40, there's a pace to it that is down here. When you're training in Wainwright, the pace is higher. When you go overseas, now the pace is up here, and there's a priority to actually what it is you're trying to do. Are you learning, or are you building? Are you growing, or are you operating? Right, like it ranges quite a bit. So that's a great question. I really like it. Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and for anyone who's listening to this, if you are a young guy or girl, Kate, I'm doing my best to drop the "Hey, you guys."
You know what?
Hey.
I heard you say that on I think it was your live yesterday.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Maybe, but I do it too. Like literally, if I'm talking to a room full of girls, I will still say, "Hey, guys." So
but okay, so I know we're going to go off topic now. I know we're into a little bit of my apologies to everyone. I'm pulling us on a tangent, but I'm just trying to do it better. But I've got old habits. I say, "Hey, you guys," when I'm really in my head thinking of guys and girls, because like someone on the regular, someone's asking me about, how do I become JTF2 or whatever. And I'll just say all the young bucks or all the young guys who are hitting me up, because they're hitting me on the regular. But I can truly say all the young guys who hit me up, because it's only guys that are hitting me up. But the moment that one girl hits me up and says, "Hey, Shaun, I'd like to be in JTF2," now I can switch to, "Hey, y'all."
Yeah, y'all.
Or whatever. Now I don't have to do all those young guys. I can say all those young guys and girls. So I'm trying to use more precise language, and I'm trying to be, I know it sounds dumb. I'm not trying to be woke. I'm just trying to be appropriate based on our years. We're in 2023. We don't have to be in the 1700s. And I just want to be respectful of people. So I'm trying to use the right language. So
my boss uses a very good one. He always says "folks."
Yeah, it's a good one. I think I don't want to say it's safe, but I think it's good.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
We always use troops. That was across the board. Hey, troops.
That's legit.
Yeah.
Which just works. So we got about 10 minutes here before we got 8 minutes or something like that. So we can jump into the next topic, or we can save this for later. What do you guys feel? You want to jump into another topic, or?
I don't even know what it is. I just enjoy chatting, so whatever comes along, I'm happy to chirp about.
Okay. Well, we actually, hold on a second. Let's dive into this. So in other words, when in preparation training, it is not mission critical to push through injury, but when in the field, it is absolutely necessary.
I don't mind taking that.
By all means.
Because I might have started that ball rolling in a little bit.
I think I might have helped with that.
Yeah. So, I think that it's an important question. And I would say that that really, again, it depends on mission criticality. Because let's face it, if there's nothing in front of you that is mission critical, and the training is it could be maintenance training, it could be repeat training, it could be, let's just tune everyone up training. It might not be new stuff. It might not be hardcore stuff. It might not be cutting edge stuff. The training could just be refresher. And so in that sense, if you've already got the skills, there's no need to go 10 out of 10 on something that you already understand. If in fact you are injured and you don't want to risk chronic injury. Now, of course, there's a fine line between how bad is that injury versus it's a tiny boo-boo. I'm not going to have that conversation. Now, if it's mission critical, in my opinion, depending on the unit that you're with, and we'll call it its status of responsiveness and how crazy things might get. If it's mission critical and you're at a sharper edge, then I think you've got to get right with the idea of possibly having to push through an injury, unless that injury makes you ineffective or makes you a weak chain in the link or makes you unreliable. And I've seen it happen with a lot of folks, myself included, where if I'm too much in the hurt locker and I think that I can't keep up in the stack, or I can't get up onto that second floor, or whatever the case is, I'm going to find a way to not be making my team vulnerable because I'm a little ineffective. And so these are conversations that you've got to have in your own head. Again, that internal baseline aspect. Then you've got to check that against the external baselining of the folks that are around you and saying, you ain't good to go. And so I think it goes back to that baseline conversation. Know who you are and see it pressure tested against those around you, and you'll figure it out.
Yeah, Shaun hit the nail on the head there with the, if you become ineffective. So say you're doing workup training to deploy somewhere, right? If you're pushing through that injury so much that you then cannot go on your deployment, like that's not a good thing either, right? Because then you're combat ineffective. Then someone else has to come up and take your position. You can't do your job. So in that sense, it's definitely important to think about like what's coming in the future and what you have to be, what the mission is, right? So
can I ask you a question, Kate? Because in my generation, like it wasn't so much when I was in 1 PPCLI, but then I've been in 2 years, and then I got bounced to the Canadian, or I requested to go to the Canadian Airborne Regiment, spent 4 years there. But while I was in the car, I was kind of taught to just suck it up.
Mm-hmm.
And so way back in the day, I mean, you never went to the medical establishment. You never went to MIR. Otherwise, you became known as an MIR commando. And now you're the guy who's the MIR commando. That's something you never want to be. And so I actually recall Tim Turner saying that during his entire time in the Canadian Airborne Regiment, I think he said he never once went to the MIR. When he was clearing out, they didn't recognize him. He said, yeah, because I've never come. And that's a fact. Like none of us ever wanted to be an MIR commando. But in looking back at those times, we were a little off base. We were a little skewed. We were a little too on the extreme end of suck it all up, when really it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, there's modern science, there's modern techniques, there's modern understandings on how acute injuries can turn into chronic injuries. And now it's not only holding a person back from a 1 week or 2 week deployment, it's actually it's not crippling them, but it's impacting them 1, 2, 10 years from now. So more of a longevity perspective. I would hope that that's the case now. Is it?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely still probably some, the term MIR commando is still around. And I think like and I kind of, who was I talking to? Someone on one of my podcasts where I was saying like, I went into the MIR because I had been having these like low back and hip problems that were just driving me nuts. And I'm like, well, I don't, I just want a referral to physio or an MRI. And I go in there and they're like, well, what do you want for a chit for your limitations, or how many days off do you want? And I'm like, no, like, I don't want days off.
Not why I'm here.
Like, I'm not here to get out of anything. Like, I would like a referral to like physio or some imaging to see what's actually going on. But I think sometimes that's almost like the first question that you're asked. So some people definitely, and I'm sure some people get a lot of injuries, but there's probably some people that do take advantage of that like a little too much.
Work in the system.
Yeah,
that does happen, and it happened in my day too, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah,
because we got asked the same thing as soon as you showed up, and I went to the MIR a few times, but not as many times as I should have.
Yeah,
because, my knees are trashed, my back is destroyed, and all these things. But it was hard because you'd be an MIR commando, 100%. And what I was teaching. Sorry, go ahead.
This is super important for anyone who's either thinking about getting into the military or is young in their career in the military, in the sense of how I did it wrong, or how it's taken me to fix a long time problem. So again, back in the day, we just didn't go to MIR. We just carried on. And so my file from my medical time in the military is about that thick. It's almost non-existent. And so, of course, I've mentioned before, I didn't get involved with Veterans Affairs or anyone. I just I left the teams and I bounced. And it was only just 3 years ago-ish or whatever, just shy of 3 years ago that I thought, man, like I got a lot of injuries. I wonder what's up, because no one had ever explained to me that there was all these services and help and this and that and whatever. Oh, and by the way, can you actually tell me what I'm supposed to do with my knees, my ankles, my this, my that? And as it turns out, like, if anyone knows anything about Veterans Affairs, I've got plus of 100% of pain and suffering compensation from the military, because I've got a boatload of chronic injuries that have all been MRI'd and CAT scanned and X-rayed and blood taken and spit tested and all of that stuff. I mean, I've got a boatload of injuries, but not a lot, most of those are on me, because I was such a hard charger. Because back in the day, you didn't take no for an answer. You just kept crushing it. But on the longevity end of things at 59, like, I'm more injured than I needed to be.
Yeah,
Some
but
of those things could have been addressed.
Yeah, but at the same time, that was the environment and the attitude back then. And I mean, I think for sort of a lot of the like hard charging units, a lot of it probably still is. I mean, it's not as bad as it was, but that's the mindset of the people there. Is people want to just push through, and like you said, I think sometimes, oh, it might, like, my hip bothers me now. I can push through, but maybe in 20 years I can't. So it is very important, definitely, if you're having this kind of these kind of issues and you are in, just get it documented somewhere, because like you said, then you could access the services later, right? So, and you have to be squeaky sometimes, right? Because I went and I'm saying like, oh, this is bothering me, and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll send you to physio, and here, do a few band exercises, and this should fix it. And then I have to keep going back to the doctor and saying like, no, I'm very sort of in tune with my body. I know that something isn't right. I would like some imaging. And, oh, okay, we'll do an x-ray. Oh no, everything's fine. Okay, well, what about an MRI? And then you kind of have to do that sometimes. And then you get the MRI, and then it's like, oh yeah, this is wrong and this is wrong. Okay, so now that's on my file. So when I do start having more of the issues, or when I get out of the military and I need some sort of something, right, then it's there and it's documented.
Yeah, that's so perfect. Important. Do the paper, because you don't want to be doing the paper on the back end like I had to. I mean, it was hellacious.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a young guy or girl listening to this, don't put yourself through what I just had to put myself through for the last almost 3 years. It sucks if there's no paper on you. You're jumping through the unnecessary flaming hoops. It's way worse at the back end than doing it now while you're in getting some paper.
Yeah. And it's quick too. Like if you're in, I'm not sure exactly what, you hear of wait times being terrible for civilians, but it's pretty quick to get. It's a lot faster to get those specialist appointments, like when you're a service member, right? They've got their whatever shortcuts or however they do it there, where they'll get you in to see a specialist or to get an MRI a lot faster probably than when you get out.
100%. I got my shoulder surgery in less than a year. And that was like went through the specialist and all the steps along the way. And yeah, other people were saying they were waiting 2-3 years before they get an actual surgery. And I had the injury, and within a year I had surgery on it. It was done. So we got one more question here, in line with what we were just talking about. And then we'll wrap it up for the day. But what would you all implement as far as injury prevention tactics while you were in? Obviously, mission readiness is imperative. So were you all very invested in injury prevention? And I can tell you for myself, I was not. I had, we used the old terminology, pain is weakness leaving the body. Which, no.
You probably got that from my generation.
Yeah, exactly,
and my generation probably got it from the previous generation.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that for reals, it's a problem within the military. At least it was in my generation. But injury prevention wasn't even a word. I mean, it wasn't even in a sentence. It didn't exist. No one said injury prevention. But I think it's something that should be considered. And let me give you an answer that I think, if the system isn't going to give you the sentence of injury prevention tactics, it's now on you. So what can you do? Get better, bigger, stronger, faster, better. If you're gonna enter into something that is arduous, and your concern is that you might break down your body based on the weight load that you're carrying, and that's going to create injury, and you want to prevent that, get stronger, get
Carry more
smarter,
weight. Yeah.
carry more weight, train,
Yeah.
develop a prevention tactic called work harder at becoming stronger and more resilient. And now there's a ton of ways that that can be done. Of course, I'm sure I don't have to mention any of those things, but get in front of any injury now by training to counter any potential injuries in the future. And the only way to do that is freaking hard work.
Yeah. And there's so many resources out there now too. Like you go on Instagram and you can find a million trainers, whatever, but there are very specific people. Like for my knee injuries, for my back injuries, I follow Knees Over Toes guy and Bulletproof Backman. Like those
I know
two
both those
guys
guys.
alone, they're like, they will set you up right, and you just follow the program, build the muscles, because as the ligaments deteriorate, the thing that you're going to need are the muscle groups to maintain that. So you build up the small muscles that help hold on to this and that and the other thing. And
that's right. I was talking with Satch about this on a live chat. I think it was a couple of days ago, and the subject came up about, hey, listen, you're running, I get it, but start doing other things. Do indoor rock climbing, throw a javelin, throw a frisbee, whatever it is, any form of human movement that is outside of the scope of your primary objective or your primary task or whatever it is. We'll call it running. Well, do other things to develop those secondary muscular groups that are supporting your primary groups. And here's why. Because if you're out there doing that job and you tear up a primary, well, at least now you've got some secondaries to stabilize or support. Mm-hmm. Also, if you're doing this single-mindedly and your primaries are awesome, eventually 12 hours, 20 hours, 40 hours later, your primaries are fatigued. And now they're going to have to start falling back on the secondary supporting structures in order for you to keep on the path that you need to path. If you want to run for 12 hours, maybe your primaries will hold you up. But at 18 hours now, you've got so much fatigue that your knee, as an example, is unstable because your primaries can't stabilize it. Now you're relying on tertiary. So, train smart for your primaries, but do other things to create secondaries.
Couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. Do you guys have any final points on either establishing a baseline or injury prevention or anything else before we shut her down for the day? Any thoughts? Anybody? Shaun, start with you.
No, thanks, Kate, for showing up. It was awesome, and I try not to hog the microphone. I just have things to say. I'm apologizing up front by jumping in so much, but Kate, thanks for coming along, and the conversation that you brought, provoking thought for anyone who's listening, but provoking thought for me. I always appreciate your opinion.
You have more wisdom and more years, so I value hearing your opinion for sure.
I need more wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, injury prevention, that's something too that only like the past couple of years I've been trying to failed previously doing it. So now I'm trying to play catch up, and it's like trying to deal with sort of those old injuries. But yeah, just like stretching, mobility. I have all the tools. I have all the foam rollers and balls, and I just bought a massage gun, which is actually pretty helpful. But I mean, if you can do it and you can afford like the body work, I know where I live, there's a lady who does Thai massage, and that was probably better than any like RMT visit that I had ever done, or visit with a chiro. Like, she was magic. So just little things like that. And it kind of, some people are like, oh, it's frivolous to spend money on a massage. But if it's going to make your body feel better and allow you to perform and prevent those injuries, then to me, that's totally worth it.
Yeah.
It not only is it money well spent, it's money invested in you, and you're always going to get that money back. And I wasn't going to add anything else, but since you raised it, Kate, I'd just like to say this in respect to recovery or looking after yourself and so on and so forth. I mean, I go to acupuncture every 2 weeks. I go to osteopath every 2 weeks. I do a bunch of things that a lot of people don't hear about or know about, all kinds of recovery protocols. And we need to talk about those things more. I need to talk about those things more. So Kate, good job bringing up the subject. Let's talk about it another time. The three of us. All right.
Sounds pretty good. Yeah, taking care of yourself is key. And I think the biggest point of that, at least in my mind, put the ego down.
Oh, 100%.
Then work on it. Because like I ego lifted when I got out and I hurt my back, and then when I hurt my back and then I got out and I was like, okay, time to get back in the gym. Let's go do this. And just I hurt myself again, and then I had the weeks off, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But just take that ego and go start fresh.
And now Big Bird needs to work on his mobility and flexibility so he can fold himself into the airplane this summer.
Oh, yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Well, hopefully I can work on the staying in the actual position instead of trying to fly back.
Dude, it doesn't matter what you do in the future. You're still a Big Bird.
Oh, yeah. No. I'm good with it, man. It's one of the best names I've ever gotten. That's why it's written right there.
That's right.
Yeah. I forgot my thing was reversed. But anyway, really appreciate you both coming back on. This is what we do here at the Collective. We discuss things, we learn, we build, and we grow. So
hang out with cool people.
Appreciate you being on here with us, Kate, again. Outstanding. I love it.
Thanks
I gave her
invite.
30 minutes notice. Like, hey, what's up? You want to jump in?
Well, I wasn't going full send on a mountain bike. I just had to move from the couch to my desk. So I was in the middle of an editing spree there. So
not too bad then. Yeah. All right. Well, again, appreciate y'all. We'll talk to you. Well, we'll talk to y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Good.